And good afternoon, folks. This is our digital update on what is going on out in the Caribbean. And thankfully, at the moment, we have no named storm. And that's sometimes good and that's sometimes bad. Bad because a lot of folks want those questions answered. And until this becomes a more organized system, there's still a lot of uncertainty. Now, what we do know is at the moment, this wave is starting to get a little bit more of a structure starting to show up. And you can really see that on our high resolution visible satellite. Now, this satellite image, and the reason it looks like this is because it's taking the satellite itself is taking an individual little sector of the Earth and doing a 1 minute update. So this is about as real time as you can possibly get. But it also shows you all those almost fine details of the storm itself. And there definitely appears to be, now this is the center of where the hurricane center is saying Invest 99 is. When you look at the daylight imagery, it certainly looks like it's a little bit more north of that. It looks just, again, solely based on satellite imagery, it looks like this may be where a center is trying to form. And most of the models are in agreement that something will form, a depression or go right to a storm, and possibly even becoming a hurricane once in the Gulf of Mexico. The next name on the list is Ida. So this is looking very likely that we will see Ida maybe by the weekend or possibly even on into Friday. Now, at the moment, it is battling some wind shear and some dry air off to the west. So the next couple of days, we're not expecting a whole lot to happen with it. Once we get toward Friday, and more so this weekend, we should have a far more developed system, which will allow the computer models to a bit more accurately forecast that projected path. So in the next day, 2 days, maybe even 2.5 days or so, there's going to be a lot of shifting with the computer models, which we're expecting. As again, when you start looking at computer models posted on social media right now, you take that with a grain of salt, as again, the models are going to have a poor time in this, what we call the early genesis phase of a developing tropical system. So with that said, that it looks like, just again, based on satellite imagery, certainly looks like there's a little circulation trying to develop right in through here. We'll colorize satellite. There are no thunderstorms developing around that center. So we are still very much in the very early stages, and computer models, admittedly so, do a very poor job in this early kind of developmental stage of a tropical system. Once it gets better organized, we'll have a better idea of where it's going to go. The only problem with that is our lead time for a named storm may only be a couple of days. If we don't see this named until Saturday, we could be looking at a Monday or Tuesday landfall, no matter where along the Gulf Coast it makes landfall. So our lead time from a named storm is only going to be a couple of days. We're not going to have a whole lot of prep time for this. So this is why just at the moment, and as we go into the weekend, make sure you have your hurricane plan laid out, depending upon if whatever we need to do with this storm, that you are ready to do it with this storm. As again, it may be something that we're dealing with on Monday and on into Tuesday. Here's kind of what's happening right now. And again, this is assuming that we will have Ida as a named storm. One of the big questions that will finally be answered probably late Friday or more so into Saturday is to exactly where that center of circulation forms and then where it starts to enter the Gulf of Mexico. Here is one scenario. What we're looking at right now is a ridge of high pressure that will likely be centered more over North Carolina. Early computer model runs going back to Sunday and Monday had this ridge settled right over us, which is really what we were hoping for. That would have kept, very similar to Grace, anything away from us. Unfortunately, it does not look like that is going to be the case. So this high center is going to be more or less right over North Carolina and the East Coast. So anything that does try and form is generally going to be steered up toward the northwest. Exactly where along the northwestern Gulf of Mexico coast is still yet to be determined. So here's the first scenario. If that low develops and moves more north of the Yucatan in the Yucatan Channel or on the northern tip of the Yucatan, most of the models that develop that have it going more or less toward Louisiana. That's not what we would like to see. And again, that would place us on the rough side, the dirty side of the storm, as we call it. Even if we're looking at a landfall in southwestern Louisiana, we're still on the wet side. You're getting that onshore flow, so coastal flooding. You're going to see the heavy rainfall and some very strong winds. Now, if it forms more into the and moves toward say the southern part of the Yucatan, which again is still very possible. It may move more toward northern Mexico or the Texas coast, still putting us on the wet side, quote unquote, and we would still likely have more of an onshore flow. It will be far enough away from the center that the impacts to southeast Louisiana would be rather minimal. So at the moment, our area to watch does cover kind of a large area, basically from northern Mexico along the Texas coast, and I'm including the entire Louisiana coast and even into southwestern coastal Mississippi. Any of these areas are going to be at risk depending upon exactly where the center of this finally starts to move into the Gulf of Mexico. And again, that may not be answered until Friday or Saturday, because as I mentioned, by Saturday, here we go, getting into the Gulf of Mexico. Late Monday, Tuesday is when it'll be along the northwestern Gulf Coast. So we are not going to have a whole lot of time. Now, throw another monkey into the wrench is something else to consider. While we watch Ida develop and move into the Gulf of Mexico, on the other side of Mexico, there is going to be a developing hurricane in the eastern Pacific. Now, one thing that's interesting and could happen, not that it will, but what could happen is that if this East Pacific storm gets strong enough, you get a strong outflow. In other words, where it's able to kind of grow higher into the atmosphere. And that could create an increasing wind shear over Mexico and the western Gulf of Mexico, which could help to weaken Ida. Now, again, these are all possible scenarios, but what we're looking at is if this storm is able to get strong enough, which we're hoping for, because usually the East Pacific storms don't affect land. They tend to stay off of the coast of Mexico, maybe Baja California, but usually tend to stay off of the coast in the Pacific. But if this gets strong enough, it would create a very strong wind shear from the outflow, and that would help to kind of rip apart Ida, or at least keep it as a weaker storm, because without that, the environment in the Gulf of Mexico is very favorable for development and possibly even some rapid intensification. Now, this is interesting. We've been waiting for a lot of those computer models to start running on 99, and we're finally starting to see a lot of the models. And what is very interesting, even with that uncertainty in the forecast, there seems to be some decent agreement with the models. Now, again, we are still very much in the early stages. And as we saw with the constant changing of some of our storms in the past, such as Henri going back before Grace, Elsa, you kind of see some shifts here and there. So not to say that these aren't going to shift. I can almost guarantee that they are. It's just very interesting to see that there is still pretty widespread. And notice, it's basically covering all of the scenarios I mentioned. The computer models, and by the way, these models are the ensemble from the National Hurricane Center. So once we eventually do see this become a named storm and we start to get a track and a cone, these are the models that the Hurricane Center uses to kind of make their best guess, best estimate as to where the storm will track. Now again, northern tip of the Yucatan, or maybe even northern Belize before crossing the Yucatan. And that does give more of a Texas coast landfall at the moment. But again, we are still very, very much in the early stages of development. Now these are two of the models. Now this is one run of the GFS and one run of the Euro. We tend to show you a lot of the ensembles. Both of these models right now are going with a landfall in southwestern Louisiana. That is not what the National Hurricane Center ensemble models are saying. And even the ensembles of the Euro and the GFS. And what an ensemble means is the computer models run several different times, sometimes dozens of times, with slightly different data inputted into it. And so you get several different outcomes. And then an ensemble is when you either show all of those models or kind of a average of all of those models. So these are just one run of the Euro and the GFS. And I mentioned the ensembles are kind of all over the place. But the Euro has a landfall in southwest Louisiana, so this would be bad news for Lake Charles. Monday at 7 p.m. The GFS also around Lake Charles Tuesday at noon. So at the moment, we're likely looking at something Monday night or early on Tuesday, maybe morning or midday for a landfall. So again, we're here Wednesday. In less than a week, we will likely have a hurricane making landfall somewhere along the northern or northwestern Gulf Coast, something that we'll be watching for very, very closely. Either way, this system does look like it is going to be sending a surge of moisture our way, and we are looking at quite a bit of rainfall that may last for several days going into early next week. Now, at the moment, the models are going with maybe 15 inches across parts of, this is over a 7-day time frame, so this is going well into next week, but across southwest, south central, and even parts of coastal southeast Louisiana. So this could be, more than anything, a big rain event for us as we get into the start of next week. Now, as we look forward, once we get a little bit better of an idea of where exactly the storm is going to go, we'll be able to have a much better idea of where that high rain swath will end up. But right now, it's just kind of forecasting a surge of moisture. And until the computer models can do a little bit better job of that precise landfall, you're going to see kind of these high rainfall estimates over large regions. Usually what will happen is if you have a strengthening storm, and let's say an estimate is it moves more toward Houston, or better for us if it's even more southwest of Houston. When you get a stronger storm, it tends to kind of take all of that moisture and draw it toward the center. Not to say we wouldn't get any rainfall, we likely would, but the heaviest of those totals would likely be near the center. So showing such a large swath of very high rainfall totals is also just kind of showing you that the computer models really don't know exactly what we're looking at. So our forecast looking ahead is very much a question mark. At the moment, I'm going with higher rain coverage, and at least our temperatures won't be quite as brutal. But at the moment, we are going to be watching for higher rain chances as we get from Monday, Tuesday, probably lingering on into Wednesday, with rain accumulations maybe somewhere in the 4 to 8 inch range, maybe higher, exactly dependent upon where that storm actually ends up tracking. Again, we are very much in the early stages, but at the moment, we should be prepared for likely some stronger winds and certainly the likelihood of some high rainfall totals, maybe over an extended period going into early next week. We still have all day today. You've got tomorrow, Friday, and even the weekend. And by this weekend, we will know a little bit more certain where the storm will likely go once it gets a little bit better organized. We'll have a complete update on the storm, the potential storm, I should say. We don't, again, have a named storm out there, and it's not very well organized, coming up on Eyewitness News at 5 and 6. And of course, we're going to be updating social media constantly throughout the entirety of this system and the entirety of hurricane season. Can't wait for the end of October.